latissimus dorsi, and then plantaris, the other famous little helper, has all the same actions as gastrocnemius. So little helper always has the same exact total synergist actions as the bigger muscle. And that takes care of insertions. Yeah, that takes care of the major insertions. Now here are the origin questions for shoulder muscles. What is the common origin bone for all rotator cuff muscles? I've seen that. What's the common origin bone for all rotator cuff muscles? A, humerus, B, clavicle, C, scapula, D, radius and ulna.
Humerus.
Oh, you're thinking, did you say humerus? What's the general origin?
Oh, origin, I'm sorry.
Scapula.
Oh, the insertion.
Scapula.
Oh, origin.
For rotator cuff? All of them have the same origin bone.
Scapula.
Scapula. That's hard though, because if humerus comes first, people tend to put humerus. Because humerus is the insertion for all shoulder muscles. Humerus, like they say, what's the general insertion for muscles that laterally rotate the shoulder, medially rotate the shoulder, flex the shoulder, extend? The general insertion bone for all shoulder muscles is humerus. Now, you can't say the general origin for all shoulder muscles because it's variable, but for the four rotator cuffs, three are origin names: supraspinatus, supraspinous fossa; infraspinatus, infraspinous fossa; subscapularis, subscapular fossa. Only teres minor name doesn't tell its axillary border, but all four rotator cuff muscles have their origin on the scapula. Three, the name tells you which feature. That makes sense? Supraspinatus, it's an origin name. Infraspinatus, it's an origin name. Subscapularis, it's an origin name. Teres minor isn't, but the origin is axillary border. Okay. So the general origin of rotator cuff muscles is definitely scapular. And it's hard to ask this, but pec major, two origin bones are sternum, clavicle. Pec major, two origin bones would be sternum, clavicle. And the other one hard to ask is, what's the origin of lats? It's so many, actually, well, they're not gonna ask that. Lats, because it's T7 through the sacrum, iliac crest, and sometimes lower ribs, so they can't ask that. They can't ask origin of lats. But I've seen this question: which of the following muscles has its origin on the vertebral column? Which of the following has its origin on the vertebral column? A, teres major; B, pectoralis major; C, latissimus dorsi; D, teres major or minor. I forgot which one I said before. Which has its origin on the vertebral column? Or did you say? Oh, okay. Teres major is not rotator cuff, but its origin is inferior angle and axillary border. And pec major is here, so the only shoulder joint muscle that has its origin, that's a good question, on the vertebral column is lats. Because that's a typical origin for scapular muscles, but shoulder muscles, the typical origin is scapula or clavicle. Okay, I'm gonna give you one other type of question. But the only muscle of the shoulder really that, not scapula, but the only shoulder muscle that has its origin on the vertebral column is, they won't ask, that's a good, I've seen that question on a lot of tests. The only shoulder joint muscle that has its origin on this vertebral column is latissimus dorsi. Because the other shoulder joint muscles, it's either mainly scapula or clavicle, actually. Now here's the other, was everyone aware that attachment, there will be some attachment questions. It comes up more with axial skeletal muscles, we're going to do tomorrow and Tuesday, where the origin insertion reverse. So, but attachment in general overlaps. If there's an attachment, which muscle has an attachment, or which muscles attach, could be origin or insertion, it's inclusive. An attachment question, I'm gonna give you the famous one. An origin counts and insertion counts in an attachment question. Okay, which of the following muscles have an, this is the most famous one. Which of the following muscles have an attachment on the clavicle? Which of these have an attachment on the clavicle? A, trapezius, B, pectoralis major, C, anterior deltoid, D, all of them, E, B, and C. Which have an attachment on the clavicle? A was trapezius, B was pec major, C was anterior deltoid, D was all of them. E was only pec major and anterior deltoid, not trapezius.
Pec major, is it?
Well, pec major has an origin, they have this, pec major has an origin on the clavicle, but anterior deltoid also has an, I'm gonna do that, also has an origin.
So does traps.
Traps has an insertion, but that counts, this is traps.
That's an
So
attachment.
those three muscles are the three that have an attachment on the clavicle. So the answer is all of them, because attachment could be origin or insertion. So pec major, it's an origin. Anterior deltoid, it's an origin. Trapezius, it's an insertion. But those are the three muscles that attach on the clavicle.
Pec major, trapezius, and what is another one?
Anterior deltoid. Okay. And the one, so those three attach, pec major, anterior deltoid, and trapezius all attach on the clavicle. Now what I forgot to do, as I was doing, I remembered, the three origins, this can come up, and it's very easy because you can palpate. The three origins of deltoid, insertion they can't ask because it's in the name, but the three origins of deltoid, anterior deltoid is lateral clavicle, you can feel it. Middle deltoid's acromion process, and posterior deltoid,
Fine.
spine of scapula. So you can see the three reds almost a little bit, but anterior deltoid, origin lateral clavicle, middle deltoid, acromion process, and posterior deltoid, spine of scapula. So you can sort of feel that on yourself. It's not cheating to palpate. I mean, I'm sure you know that when you take these tests, it's okay, obviously, to palpate. Once during the final, there was a horrible question on push-ups, a long time ago, 20 years ago. And, you know, this guy he was the only one left in the room. Everyone else had finished, and I could tell he was in a frantic state of hyper-anxiety. So I gave him some medication. No, I'm just kidding. And there was a push-up question, and he was on the floor doing, this wasn't gonna help the state he was in. He was doing push-ups. I mean, every muscle in his body was contracting at that time. He was frantically doing push-ups to answer me. Okay. It was a horrible question because so many muscles are involved, and they were asking about something. I'm gonna do the eccentric stuff after I finish this stuff. I'm gonna do the intro stuff quickly. There's a few, maybe 4 or 5 questions on the intro stuff, but they're usually eccentric, or the types of muscle contraction, or a practical application of slack or stretch, which I'm gonna give you. I'm gonna show how to answer all those questions. There's a formula for those that'll make them easy if you know the actions of the muscle, which you're gonna know. So, okay, they're not gonna ask it in a abstract. They're gonna ask slack or stretch. You probably already had in a specific muscle. How do you put gastroc on the slack, or how do you put rectus femoris on the stretch? That kind of stuff. Okay, there's a formula. You don't have to memorize anything for that. Okay. So that took care of the shoulder muscles, and now I'll go to the elbow muscles, and I'll do insertions first. I'll do insertions. So for biceps, it's radius the insertion of biceps brachii is radial or bicipital tuberosity, but it's definitely radius. Insertion of biceps brachii is radius, bicipital tuberosity. Insertion of brachialis is ulnar tuberosity. So you have equalized pull. So insertion of biceps brachii is radial tuberosity, radius. Insertion of brachialis, ulnar tuberosity of ulna. Okay. Insertion of brachioradialis is, I've seen it once in a while, styloid process radius. Doesn't cross the wrist, but it goes all the way here. So the insertion of brachioradialis is styloid process of the radius. Okay. And triceps is the, okay, so I'll put this in question form. Don't worry about Anconius, but the insertion of triceps brachii is which? Insertion of triceps brachii is which of these? A, infraglenoid tubercle of scapula. B, supraglenoid tubercle of scapula. C, olecranon process of ulna. This is insertion of triceps. D, distal posterior humerus. What's the insertion of triceps?
The olecranon.
Olecranon process. The other three were origins. One of them, infraglenoid, is the long head origin of triceps. Supraglenoid, you don't need to really worry about it. That's the long head of biceps origin, and this is the medial head. We're not going to ask that origin, but the insertion of all of triceps always gets asked. That's a major one. Olecranon, that's one feature. The insertion of triceps is olecranon process of ulna. So the major insertions, the four major elbow muscles, biceps, radial tuberosity, radius, brachialis, ulnar tuberosity, ulna, brachioradialis, styloid process, radius, and triceps or insertion, olecranon process of ulna. Okay. The general, I'm going to give you this. This is a question I've seen a million times. The general insertion of muscles that pronate to form is, the general insertion of muscles that pronate to form is A, humerus, B, ulna, C, radius, D, B, and C.
Radius.
Tell me the name of the bone. What's the general insertion bone for muscles that pronate? Only radius.
Radius. Only
Mhm.
radius.
Yeah, it was a general insertion for muscles that pronate. For muscles that pronate to form, the general insertion
Radius.
radius. And if they said for muscles that supinate, what would the answer be?
Also radius.
Yeah, the ulna doesn't
Ulna
pivot.
doesn't move
So
it.
whether, that would be a trick, but whether they ask a general insertion for pronators or supinators, it's the radius only. Okay, so muscles that pronate to form, the general insertion has to be radius. Muscles that supinate to form, because only the radius pivots. For muscles that supinate to form, the general insertion is also radius. So for pronators or supinators, the general insertion, I've seen that many times, has to be the radius. That's on quiz Tuesday. This stuff is not tomorrow, so you have 48 hours. Okay. Okay. And oh yeah, now origins. Just for biceps, just know, here's the standard question on biceps. The origin bone of biceps or bones of biceps brachii is. The origin bones of biceps brachii is A, scapula, B, humerus, C, radius, D, A and B. The origin bone, A was, I think A was scapula, B humerus, C radius, that's insertion. D, A, and B, that means scapula and humerus. What's the general origin bone of biceps? That's a tricky question. It's only
Glenoid?
scapula, because it's
It connects
the
with the
short-
humerus, but it attaches at the scapula.
it doesn't attach to humerus at all. The short head is
passes
the
it?
coracoid, bicep short head is coracoid process, and the long head is supraglenoid tubercle.
Mhm.
So, that means both origins are scapula. So, it's not a combo. The general origin of biceps, both of them, is only scapula.
So it goes under the arm, doesn't even touch.
It's inside the joint?
It's inside the
It's
joint.
inside the joint.
Yeah, it functions like an intracapsular ligament, believe it or not.
Okay.
It's the only tendon in the body that I've ever read about. It actually is deep inside the shoulder joint. The shoulder joint needs a lot of stability, and because that tendon's always tight, tense, it actually functions like an intracapsular ligament.
Does it help prevent like the anterior slippage on the joint?
Yeah, it would, yeah. And people that, they often found, I read this, that people that had deep shoulder injuries, usually from, like, could be a baseball pitcher or someone, football quarterback, if they had to do surgery, they often found that that tendon was torn. There's no way of knowing that because that tendon is so overused. Not always, but once in a while I've read about that. And it's a common injury of massage therapists. If you're doing high speed, like a lot of clients nowadays want you to beat them and hit them very hard, like deep tissue to the extreme, you could hurt your shoulder joint. That's why I don't do it. They wanna, I'm just kidding.
So you push more with your legs, right?
Yeah, plus, it only happens with high velocity. Shoulder joint injuries like that only happen with, like people throwing very high velocity. If you're doing that in a massage situation, if you're doing tremendous velocity, it means you're beating up the client. So, it's not it's outside, it's not really therapeutic. It might be for some people, but it's not considered, okay. So we never do that, basically. The bottom line is that massage therapists usually, if they work within normal boundaries of which you never have shoulder injuries. Once in a while, some tennis elbow, even that is from twisting, torquing. So usually massage therapists, the injuries are much more distal. The weak spots in the line of fire is the thumb, the saddle joint, and the wrist joint. That's where massage therapists have injuries,
Oh,
because those are the weak spots.
this one,
Yeah.
you call it like I get like numb here sometimes because before a long time ago I do massage a lot and then here like this spot is numb.
Did you do a lot of this?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's no good for, I'm not saying, it's used, this will automatically, if you work like this over a long period of time, you will develop all kinds of problems.
No, I do this.
Oh, like that? Oh, okay, that's okay. Yeah, I'm not saying you did that, but I'm not sure. Everyone works different, but this is a no-no now there's this types of massage where people do this, but this will hyperextend your wrist, putting a lot of pressure on the nerves, tendons, ligaments. That will, over time, cause problems. Okay.
Going back to biceps brachii origin on the scapula, it's coracoid process and infraglenoid?
Supraglenoid.
Supraglenoid.
Okay, so before I go off the deep end, the other question I've seen on finals, this is a good question, so I'll give some choices, but the attachment bones of triceps brachii. Okay, I'll backtrack to biceps in a minute, but the attachment bones of triceps brachii, I'll give you 3 combos. Attachment means origin and insertion. The attachment bones of triceps brachii are A, scapula humerus radius, that's one, scapula humerus radius. B, scapula humerus ulna. C, humerus ulna, just humerus and ulna. For triceps, what are the overall attachment bones? It's really between scapula humerus ulna and scapula humerus radius. Those are the 2 choices. It's scapula, for triceps, it's scapula humerus ulna. Cause one origin is long head scapula, two origins humerus, insertion, ulna. That's a good question, I've seen that on many finals. The overall attachments of triceps are scapula, humerus, ulna. Same choices, I might, for biceps, you can just tell me, what are the attachment bones overall for biceps brachii? You could just give me your own combo.
Scapula,
Scapula and,
The radius.
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it comes down to, there'll be a choice, scapular and ulna, scapula and radius, that's the answer. And there'll be a scapula humerus radius, scapula humerus ulna, but humerus no attachment on the humerus. So for biceps, the overall attachments are scapula radius. For biceps, it's just scapula radius. For triceps, both of them get asked, it's scapula humerus ulna. For triceps, scapula humerus ulna. And now I'll ask you one that I've seen on the school final many times. Which muscle has an origin on medial epicondyle of humerus and inserts mid-shaft radius? Which muscle, and I'll give choices, which muscle has origin on the medial epicondyle of humerus and inserts mid-shaft radius? A, supinator, B, pronator teres, C, pronator quadratus, D, brachioradialis. So it's an origin, medial epicondyle, insertion, mid-shaft radius, medial epicondyle to mid-shaft. If you draw it on yourself,
Pronator teres.
would you say?
Pronator teres.
That's pronator teres. I've seen that question. Yes, very good. So, which muscle has origin, medial epicondyle, insertion, mid-shaft? Only pronator teres. Quadratus is much more distal. So that would be, and supinator is not quite mid-shaft, and the origin is lateral epicondyle. The origin, supinator will never be an answer to that, but it's medial epicondyle to mid-shaft radius is, and I would know that's the origin, insertion for pronator teres, medial epicondyle to mid-shaft radius. And the general origin of all the wrist flexors and pronator teres, know that is medial epicondyle humerus. The general is origin, that's a general origin, because insertion's hard to ask for the wrist flexors, they're too variable. But the general origin of all the wrist flexors, except the super deep ones, but if they just say the general origin of the wrist flexors, they want medial epicondyle. It's also pronator teres origin, but it's a common, that's the common flexor tendon, so it's from medial epicondyle, it's for general origin of all the wrist flexors and pronator teres. For the wrist extensors, we did the 5 before, so I'll ask you, what's the general origin of all wrist extensors? What's the general origin of all wrist extensors? A, medial epicondyle humerus, B, lateral epicondyle humerus, C, fifth metacarpal, D, pisiform hamate. Yeah. Lateral epicondyle is the general origin for the wrist extensors. Know that. The lateral epicondyle is the general origin for the wrist extensors, and the medial epicondyle is the general origin for the wrist flexors and pronator teres. Okay, so overall, the 5 muscles, and I covered them piece one at a time, but the 5 muscles that you definitely need to know origin and insertion for are biceps brachii, or brachialis I did indirectly, but origin, anterior, humerus, insertion, we did ulnar tuberosity. So, but the ones you need to know origin and insertion, the big 5 in this area are biceps brachii, brachialis, brachioradialis, and triceps, we covered that, and pronator teres. Those 5 know origin and insertion. And now I'll put this is a hard question, but I'll put it, which muscles, there'll be a combo, but I won't bother with choices now. Which muscles have an origin on the lateral supracondylar ridge of the humerus? There's actually two muscles. Which muscles have origin on lateral